Hello everyone and welcome to the 2012 Fall Home Show. My name is Elaine Ferguson and I am a certified Simply Music teacher. Today I'll be telling you a little bit about the program as it's a little bit different from traditional methods. There's four main reasons why Simply Music is attracting the attention that it is. First is the quality of music that students play. We begin two hands together right from the very beginning, and we teach classical, the blues, contemporary, and accompaniment pieces right from the very beginning. We also, students will learn maybe about, very quickly, they'll have about 30 to 50 pieces that they'll have in their repertoire, and they'll find that going through the process, it's a very easy way of learning. It's not a very laborious one. So what I'll do now is maybe I'll tell you a little bit more about how Simply Music got started. It was created by a man by the name of Neil Moore. He's an Australian. And back in 1997, he moved to Sacramento, California with his wife and his 3 children. And back then, Neil Moore was the head of a teacher training organization that was reading-based. So they started with notes on the page. It was a little bit alternative, but basically they started with notes on the page. And what happened was one day he got a call from a government agency and they said, "Neil, we have this blind 8-year-old boy. Can you teach him how to play?" And Neil said, "Sure, I can, no problem." And so he took on the challenge, not knowing how he was going to do it. And finally, he had to figure out a way of teaching him. And he said, "You know what? I'm going to teach him a version of the way that I learned to play the piano." And I'll take you back to Neil's childhood. Neil was the youngest of 5 children, and in his home, his mom and dad said all of the children were going to learn to play the piano as soon as they turned 7 years old. So he grew up in a family of music, surrounded by music. And Neil's mom always describes him to be someone who's always had a strong affinity for music. She describes stories of how she would lay a blanket on the floor and she would lay him on the ground and put the radio beside him to entertain him. And what he would do is he would actually roll towards the radio and he could listen to it all day long. He absolutely loved it. And so as the years passed, he grew up watching his brothers and sisters play. And there was a highly classically trained piano teacher that came in every Saturday morning. And when Neil turned 7 years old, it was his turn to start taking lessons. And so the teacher would sit down and she would demonstrate the piece for Neil and said, "Okay, Neil, this is the song that you're going to learn to play this week." And what he would do is he would actually stand there and he would watch her. And he could see the song in terms of shapes and patterns and sequences. And that would be quite strange for the normal person, but for him it was actually quite normal. And so throughout the week, when he was actually supposed to be learning how to read music, what Neil would do is he would take apart the song and he would learn it the way that he saw it. And then the next week when the teacher came back and said, "Neil, can you play me that song?" And he said, "Sure, I can." And so what he would do is he'd open the music and he'd stare straight at it and he began to play the piece, trying to fool her into thinking that he was actually reading music. And the teacher wasn't fooled, but she didn't say anything. And she let it go on for a couple of weeks, and then when she was absolutely sure that he wasn't reading music, the teacher went in to his mom and said, "Neil's not reading." And she looked at the teacher and said, "Yes, but listen to him play." And so the teacher and his mom sat down and they had some in-depth conversations, and they decided, you know what, let's just let him learn the way that he learns, and let's just see what happens. And it was so thankful that they did, because by the time he was 13 and 14 years old, he was composing and he was improvising very complex and intricate pieces of music. He could actually listen to the radio and reproduce whatever it is that he heard. It was just simply amazing. And so here he was. This is actually, he didn't learn to read a note of music until he was in his 30s. And so here he was, the head of a teacher training organization that was reading-based, and he had Wade, this blind 8-year-old boy, and he began taking songs and simplifying them and putting them into Wade's hands. And Wade began to learn to play the piano. And things were going very, very wonderfully. And about 3 months into the program, he said, "You know what, I better check with his parents and just make sure that things are going okay." And so he called his father in, and they sat down and had a conversation. And that was actually the conversation that changed Neil Moore's life. Because when he asked him, how is Wade doing? The father responded by saying, "Neil, not only are we so impressed with the way that Wade is playing, how much he's enjoying what he's doing, and how quickly he's learning, but Wade is going home and he's teaching his 4-year-old sister how to play, and she's blind too." And so when Neil heard that, he knew he had something. He didn't know what it was. Was this going to be musical preschool or an introduction to music? but he just knew that he had something. And so over time, he began developing more curriculum. And then eventually he said, okay, you know what? Let me try it with some other students. He took a test pilot group of 120 students of all ages and all musical backgrounds, and he began teaching them how to play the piano. And all of a sudden, consistent results began to emerge. People were saying how excited they were by being able to play. People were so excited that they were going home and they were teaching their friends and their families. And parents were saying, you know what? I don't have to force him to play. He's actually going and he's playing on his own. And he thought this was absolutely amazing. So a little while later, he said, okay, I know that I can do this, but can other people do it as well? So he began training other teachers how to teach. And they began to produce similar results as well. So now there's 700 teachers worldwide. We're in New Zealand, we're in Australia, we're in the United States, and now here in Canada. In Canada, we're still relatively young. When I first started 5 years ago, I was a 7th teacher, and now we're over 40. So we're growing very quickly, but over all of Canada, 40 is still not a very big number.